Brand new research from our next guest reveals the president is getting a lot of attention on Russian state-sponsored news outlets. Legit seeming Russian state news media is one weapon they have, one weapon they use. Another is Americans themselves. U.S. senators, members of Congress, TV hosts using the Russian talking points out loud in public. These are people who, in other words, know better, embracing Russian propaganda. While he has tried to clean it up since without much success, here now is Louisiana Republican Senator John No Relation Kennedy this past Sunday morning, followed by Tucker Carlson from just last night.
Senator Kennedy, who do you believe was responsible for hacking the DNC and Clinton campaign computers, their emails? Was it Russia or Ukraine?
I don't know, nor do you, nor do any of us.
The entire intelligence community says it was Russia.
Right, but it could also be Ukraine. I'm not saying that I know one way or the other.
Why do I care what's going on in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm serious. Like, why do I care?
Tell you why.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia, which I am?
They're the front lines of stopping Russia against Western Europe.
Who cares?
Well, okay, I think the people in Western Europe, NATO cares. You may not. I think a lot of
I don't live in Western Europe. I live in D.C., and I don't care. Before we go, earlier in the show, I noted that I was rooting for Russia in the contest between Russia and Ukraine. And, of course, I'm joking. I'm only rooting for America, mocking the obsession with Russia that so many on the left have.
With us for more on all of it tonight, Clint Watts, former FBI special agent, author of Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News, and a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, through which he is about to release his latest study of Russian-sponsored news media. We also welcome to the broadcast the veteran journalist John Harwood, editor-at-large for CNBC, who covers Washington for a living. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Clint, I'll start with you, as you've been kind enough to share this before it gets released. What does round two show, especially about news coverage of our president?
It wouldn't be what a lot of people, particularly on the political left, would think, which is that, yes, Russia wanted Donald Trump to win going into 2016. Vladimir Putin will even say that on stage nowadays. But they don't necessarily treat him that great in terms of their state media. And they really have to separate him as two different, distinct individuals. One, the candidate, Donald Trump, that's going to actually run in 2020 versus the head of state. And what you find pretty consistently is it breaks in two different lanes. If he's the candidate, they're far more positive towards him. They see him as a candidate who's done great things for the country of the United States. It's interesting that Russia wants to give their opinion about what our president has done for our country. But then on the negative side is when President Trump drifts into foreign policy that doesn't match with what Russia wants, you start to see the negative mentions, the negative story headlines pick up. And that will also oftentimes be tied in with some sort of negative gaffes or things that the president might have done that speak to his character or mistakes that he made, which is also very common of Biden. We talked about him last week. They will go after him for his age, for making mistakes, for gaffes. They do that very similarly with the president in terms of their media coverage.
John, I want to share with our viewers the reason I invited you on the broadcast. It was because a tweet you put out after we heard that kind of jaw-dropper from Senator John No Relation Kennedy. You wrote, "Here's a Republican senator disseminating Russian intelligence propaganda fabricated to harm the United States. He's doing it because it helps him politically." And I had this thought. You and I are approximately the same age. We came up under the same training and sets of rules. Yet these times clearly require playing by a different set of rules. You would never have used that language 10 years ago. I know you too well. I see totally why you've used that language this past weekend.
Brian, it is shocking the point that we have reached in this debate. The Republican Party, for a number of years, has moved further and further away from reason and rationality as they've lost what they once thought was a natural majority in the country. And rather than adapt broaden the base of the party, reach out to new voters. They've tried to maximize the use of sort of blunt force politics. We've seen this in voter suppression. We've seen this in wild arguments against President Obama, in bogus arguments for some of the president's tax cut and other programs. But now we've gotten to a point where it is so clear a president elected with help from Russians, who welcomed that help, as Robert Mueller told us, who then tried to obstruct an investigation into it, continued that attempt to use foreign help in an election with Ukraine. He's been caught clearly doing it. It is unambiguous. We know what happened. It's been shown what happened. And now to try to justify, because there's no factual defense of what the president has done, they are leaning on what Fiona Hill clearly identified as Russian propaganda in the hearings last week. Fiona Hill is not a Democrat. She's not a liberal. She's one of the foremost experts on Russia in the government. The president's own Homeland Security advisor told him that this was bogus. It was propaganda. And yet what we've seen is Republican elected officials, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who himself has been implicated in this, are parroting this propaganda as a way of defending the president. We can presume that those people, Pompeo, Kennedy, and others, actually know better. Not entirely clear that President Trump does. You know, President Trump evinces a certain detachment from reality. It's possible that he's been somehow persuaded, and his paranoia has made him think that that this is what's happening. But anyone with open eyes, clear eyes, can see that that's not what happened. And as for Tucker Carlson and Fox News, they get paid money to appeal to that audience and parrot that kind of stuff. Tucker Carlson's kind of a troll, as he said. He was joking, but that's, I think, his motivation is a little bit more transparent.
Clint, let's talk about Senator Kennedy. He likes to skew homespun. Vanderbilt, UVA law, right. Oxford educated Senator Kennedy. He made his first comments on Fox News with Chris Wallace, attempted the cleanup last night on CNN with Chris Cuomo, a cleanup which still left the strong whiff of it was probably Ukraine. Is there anything to be gleaned from his choice of those two networks?
I find it interesting how he is playing this, which is trying to open up the aperture, right? This is a very Russian approach, by the way, which is if there is truth, drown it out with falsehoods, which means it could be any number of possible scenarios. It could be any human on the planet that also tried to influence the election. You can do this in an infinite way, and it becomes almost impossible to defend. You could go to the senator and say, well, what would you like us to do? What would you want us to investigate? Where's the thread? And it would be pretty open, I would imagine. And so when you get to the end of this, it just leaves you wondering, as RT would say, question more. That is literally the headline of their news site every single day. And that method just leaves you open to this sort of doubt. And that is the entire goal of it. But when you hear from an elected official like this senator who knows better, when you see him on multiple outlets giving slightly parsed or different answers, which is what we've heard of the Mueller investigation, impeachment, you name any sort of topic in the Trump era, it becomes impossible for Americans to know what to believe. And they actually tune out. It creates apathy amongst the public in terms of policy debate. You can't have policy debate. You can't move forward as a country if you can't decide on what actually happened or not.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.